Well, welcome to our first review, and I thought I'd just kind of go back to the beginning a little bit. It's hard to know what to include. Okay, this is where your feedback on what you want me to talk about is going to be really important. And the question is, what do you think would be most useful? And what I suggest is going through the book pretty quickly. How do I prepare? I had to go through school too. I took a lot of final exams. Um, you'd be surprised how many people have told me, "Oh, I understand the material really well. I'm just a really poor test taker." Well, it turns out everybody seems to be a poor test taker. Nobody has come up to me and said, "Oh, I'm just a really good test taker. I didn't understand the material too well, but I'm just a really good test taker." No, nobody told me that. Everybody says they study really hard, they prepare, but they do poorly on the test. Um, yeah, that happens. That does happen, and there is a difference in test taking skills and abilities, and it's something you can work on. Um, but sometimes you think you know something, and maybe you don't know it as well as you think you know it. And I mean, Jean Piaget, he was really interested in what is knowledge, how is knowledge acquired, some deep philosophical questions here. Um, and the more I learn about Piaget, the more I like him. I'd like to read some of his books. He published a lot of books, and I think we're doing a pretty big injustice by just giving little tidbits about him. I'm about halfway through a psychology lecture that I found on Piaget, but it's an hour and a half long. I'm enjoying it. Well, I like this idea that you're made of matter and information, or how does information interact with matter? What is a thought from a biological standpoint? What is learning in terms of what changes actually happen in your brain? How do you remember something? These are big questions without easy answers, uh, and it's a very fascinating field. How does somebody learn? And we're getting better at teaching machines to learn, computers to learn. The Japanese game of Go, um, the Google's computer, um, AlphaGo. uh, Google Google has artificial intelligence programming, and Google's AI, artificial intelligence, won the fifth and final game against the Go genius Lee Sedol, from who's considered the world's best Go player. This is an ancient game, the game of Go, very popular in Korea, China, Japan. Um, I think Lee Sedol is Korean, considered the best in the world. This is a much more complex game than chess, and computer scientists have been trying to teach computers how to play Go for years and years and years, and it's been really, really difficult. And um, the one of the challenges is that, uh, well, never mind the challenges. Let's just say that it's very difficult, more difficult to play Go well than to play chess well, and even though it looks pretty simple. So this is a little unsettling, that it's able to do this, to defeat the Grandmaster at, finishing the best of 5 series with 4 wins and 1 loss. And I'm just reading parts of this article. The win puts an exclamation point on a significant moment for artificial intelligence. Over the last 25 years, machines have beaten the best humans at checkers, chess, Othello, even Jeopardy. This is the first time a machine has topped the very best at Go. Um, but the interesting thing is that they didn't program it to with all possible Go moves it's different than IBM's program that beat at chess. It's different because the computer Deep Blue that won at chess and won at Jeopardy, in that case they fed it every possible chess move, and it would just basically run these algorithms and predict the best moves and so forth. But with Go, it was an artificial intelligence. It learned Go, and it learned very quickly through analyzing matches. And anyway, so we're learning how to teach a machine how to learn, which is an interesting thing. And so that's teaching us a little bit more about how it is that we learn. You know, what is learning? Just a second, I'm going to close my door. Hi.
Hi, guys. How are you?
Good. Okay. People in the hallway there. Okay, so back to your final. When I prepare for a final exam, I get my book, and I go through very quickly, multiple times, and it can be overwhelming. Can you go through your whole book in an hour? And what are you going to take away from that? And you can't take notes in an hour. You know, what can you do? And I would suggest you try this. Try to go through the whole book in an hour. And if you can't do that, try to go through, a quarter of it in an hour. And just, what can you do at fast speed? And so when I'm doing this, when I'm preparing for a final or a big test, and I've had some massive comprehensive tests and some big tests. This book, this is a killer textbook, and one that's just massive and hard for me. And so what happens by going through quickly and looking for the bold words, looking for the main headings, and I can tell quickly when I see a word if I have anything to associate that word with. So I see the word meiosis, and I think to myself, do I understand what is meiosis? Could I explain meiosis to somebody? If yes, great. I go on, and I see the stages of meiosis. Do I know prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, cytokinesis? If yes, I move on. If no, I don't have time in my 1 hour through the whole book to learn it. All I can do is write down the concept, meiosis or telophase or whatever, and I just write it down as a weak point. That's all I do, and I keep going as fast as I can. Genetic recombination, map units, cytogenetic maps, Down syndrome, and just kind of very quickly checking on myself. Does it fit into the knowledge framework? Do I have something to attach it to? Can I build off of that? If somebody gave me that word, can I talk about it? Can I talk about it for a minute? Can I talk about it? And the bigger the heading, the more that I should be able to say about it. If it's just one word, maybe I just need to know a definition. Maybe I just need to understand the concept. But if it's photosynthesis, that's a big concept. There are a ton of details there. So if it's a big heading, if it's a chapter heading, like, okay, could I talk about this for an hour? Could I outline it all by myself? It just helps you to see what the weak spots are. And so with our book, I can tell you I have a lot of weaknesses with this book. This isn't a book I've studied a lot. Chapter 2, these principles of learning, that's a pretty hard chapter for me. Jean Piaget, Jerome Bruner, Benjamin Bloom, Robert Gagne, Joy Paul Guilford. What can I say about these guys? If you just give me the name, what material can I give you without looking at the book, without looking at a slide? Just give me the name. What can I tell you? If you ask me to compare two of them, can I do that? Not very well. So I know that's a weak spot. Okay, and so first time through, in my very quick time through, I'm just looking, how many weak spots do I have? Boom, 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 boom. And there are going to be lots of them. Lots of weak spots. Okay? And once I have them, when I've gone through, I'm going to maybe start filling it out, trying to build a structure. Back to Piaget. Okay, what can I tell you? I remember he was constructivism. Okay, that you build this knowledge, you construct it. And I remember these stages of development. Now, according to the lecture that I was just watching on Piaget, he didn't really care about that. I mean, people quote him all the time with that. That wasn't really important to him as much as other questions. But that you have to build a framework. If I just give you the word okay, it means nothing. Of course, it's just nonsense. But if I gave a framework for that, and I said, "Oh, I'm going to give you this word, and this is going to be," I have to attach it to something that you already know. So in the case of Piaget, what do I know? Well, he's in chapter 2. He's one of these masters. He studied mollusks. He was brilliant at age 10, and by 18 he had a PhD or something ridiculous. And now it was 21 that he had a PhD. Tidbits, and one thing that I notice is that people try to memorize tidbits. Which that's the knowledge level in the Bloom taxonomy, right? One of these people, some places is Bloom, right? And we have a tendency to stay at that little level of trying to memorize a tidbit. That's fine to memorize tidbits, but if you don't have a framework to attach it to, it's going to be really hard to hold that in your head. Can you tell me 20 tidbits about your house? Yeah, because you have a whole framework, a whole mental framework of your house. You have all that in your head. And if there was some change in your house, some new thing, you'd have a place to put it in your knowledge base. But if there's some tidbit, some little object in my house that you've never been in before, you don't have that framework to necessarily remember it. Okay. So my suggestion, maybe if the book is too daunting to go through the whole book, go through all the slides very quickly. And again, look for the weak points. Part of why this chapter is weak for me is because the vocabulary is strange for me. Inactive level equals concrete, direct manipulation of objects. I have a different meaning for the word concrete most of the time. Or inactive. What are we talking about here? He obviously has, his own definitions, but not being a psychology background, I don't necessarily understand what's meant by iconic. And I have definition for iconic or symbolic. If my kid asks me what does iconic mean, I can give a definition, but it's not going to be related to mental images without direct manipulation. That doesn't make any sense to me. And just having this little tidbit, that's not going to help me. I actually have to go get more. I have to go get more and see it from new angles and see what was trying to mean there. So I'm going to cut this short because I haven't had feedback for what you guys do want me to talk about. A lot of it, it's your own process of learning. You have to have these things in your head that you then recognize it on the test. I had that little video about guessing well on a test, and I emphasized then it's always best to know it, to know the information so you don't have to guess. But what is it to know? And the book has a little story about 6 blind men touching an elephant, right? And they're all told, oh, we're going to let you meet an elephant. And one of them touches a leg and concludes, oh, an elephant is kind of like a tree, a leathery tree. Another one touches the tail and says, oh, the elephant is like a whip, with a fly swatter thing at the end. Another one touches an ear and says, oh, an elephant's like a big leathery sheet that you could use as an umbrella. Another one touches the trunk and says, oh, the elephant's like a giant snake. And they all have an incomplete picture of what an elephant is. And so if they then went and took a test about an elephant, and they're blind, so it's not a written test, but if the one who touched the trunk is then given a test where he touches the leg of an elephant, he's not going to identify it correctly. It doesn't match his mental image of an elephant. Okay, his mental picture is incomplete. I have very incomplete mental picture for most of these guys and their ideas. Okay, and so what can I do? All I can do is try to fill in as many gaps as possible. I'm not going to become an expert on Robert Gagne versus Jean Piaget. I don't have the time to become an expert on that. But one thing I can do is try to get some different perspectives. Try to look at the trunk and the leg and the tail and the ear, and then I'll have a more complete picture. Oh, yeah, okay. I kind of have a general idea of this is Piaget. This idea, that sounds like it comes from Piaget. Oh, yeah, this idea, I can kind of see what Piaget was after more. What was his main emphasis? So, on the one hand, I'm telling you that you should try to know something, from many different angles. Try to get the most complete picture you can. Try to make as many connections as you can between things. And on the other hand, I recognize that when it comes to a test, it'll be, oh, here's one little tidbit, beep, and do you remember this one little tidbit? Do you know which box to put it in? And sorry about that, but if you have the complete picture, you're more likely to fit those tidbits in correctly. Keep in mind that with the test, the main problem is the wording. The main problem that people have is understanding what is that question really asking, and try to reword the question. Try to write it in your own language, your own wording, and just in your head. Just what is this question really, really asking, and try to rewrite the answers. Oftentimes, it's a simple question, and it's just worded in a way that is confusing. It's just dumb, because then it's not really testing your knowledge of the subject. It's testing how well you understand the wording of the question. Dumb. So be careful with that. So back to how do I approach studying? Why do I go through the whole thing very quickly? Because kind of like looking at a town from the air first. If you move to a new town and you don't have a map, it would be nice if you could get up in the air and fly back and forth around it a lot. You can't do that, and so you're stuck on the streets and you're wandering around a lot. And of course, the areas that you walk back and forth on or drive back and forth on the most, that's where you're going to be most familiar. And you might think, oh, I know this town. I've been here 2 months and I can really find my way around. Well, it turns out you've been following the same path over and over and over. And there are whole areas of the town that you don't even know exist. That's what happens, I think, with our learning too. When we go through the book, we tend to walk the same pathways and think, yeah, I know it, because we recognize some familiar landmarks, and we don't get off of the pathway too often. We don't go looking for what we don't know. So by trying to take a higher view of the whole thing, I try to see, oh, look, there's a whole area that I don't know. Oh, look, over there, I've never gone there before. So that's what I'm trying to do when I go through quickly, is to get a better map of the whole thing, and try to figure out which patches do I know the least. And I would say spend the least time on what you know the best. Because if you know it already, then spending extra time on it is kind of a waste. So I don't know if it's best to work on areas that are the very hardest for you. Not necessarily, because if it's really hard for you, you might not even have the framework to put it in. And so you could spend a lot of time on those really hard areas and not make any progress. So if something's really hard, really confusing, like I totally didn't get how electricity is produced, then just, that would be something, send me a text or a note, say, hey, talk about how electricity is produced. Because spending more time reading what you did before won't give it to you. You might be able to find some additional sources looking at it from different angles, and maybe you'll get it. But it's not always going to give you the best results to study at your weakest points. So don't study your very weakest, don't study your very strongest. That in-between stuff might be where you'll have the most progress, the most chance of getting something right. Because sometimes, how often are you, you're at a question, you get it down to two answers, and it's like, there's one or these, one of these two, and you wish that you could just know a little bit more so you could choose correctly. This is the right one. So that area, that strength of knowledge might be what gives you the most return for your effort. If you find those areas where you're weak, but you do have an overall framework, and so you just need to strengthen it up a little bit, that might be the place to focus your effort first. And then when you go through it again, try going through again, then you have, you can start strengthening the other areas a little bit more, the slightly weaker areas. Okay, that's just philosophizing. As you can see, I'm not going through these slides at the moment. This is a tidbit, and I know there are questions like this, 9 steps of instruction, and so maybe there's a tendency, maybe you'll really want to memorize this because it's a list and it has 9 steps and you can really work at that. Careful there, careful there, because it's easy to get bogged down into memorizing detail and forget the big picture, right? So do try to take that big picture view, try to fit big parts together, try to build that framework, and then try to fit these other things in there. And if you have this list, this is interesting, but I personally don't memorize lists like this, or rarely. Sometimes you think, oh, like this, an active level, iconic level, symbolic level, maybe that would be a question because it's 3 things, and I don't know. I would just try to associate these words with Bruner and say, okay, I don't even understand them. I'll come back to that as a weak area maybe. Piaget's 4 stages of cognitive development. You might say, well, I saw a question about that, so maybe I'm going to memorize those. Sensory motor, 2 to 3, birth to 2 to 3 years, pre-operational, I hate to memorize stuff like this, but I know that it's probably, there's a test question in there. But instead of trying to just memorize it, I would try to understand, why is it called sensor motor? Why is it, in this early stage? What's going on? What do little babies do? Why is it called pre-operational? And I don't know. I would, yeah. There's no right, perfect answer, no perfect way to do this. But I do recommend to not get too stuck in the details. Do try to cover lots of ground, run back and forth across as much ground as possible, even if it doesn't feel like it's sticking. Make those word lists of the weaker concepts. Email them to me. Maybe I can start to see some patterns, some things that I can explain. I know we don't have too much time. I will try to make more reviews on Thursday and Friday. I will not be making any videos tomorrow, and so chapters 11 and 12 will also be Thursday and Friday, and maybe Saturday if I need to. Okay, keep learning. Try not to get freaked out about the final. Try to stay excited about the subject. Oh, one last tidbit. I'm sitting down here. I don't usually sit down if I've got a big book and I'm trying to get through a lot of content. I stand up, I walk, I talk to myself, I pace. So I'm walking around like this, and I'm looking at words, and I'm seeing if I know stuff, and then I stop and I pause and I write down a little thing on the table. I try to be physically active as part of my being actively engaged in the book, because textbooks are boring and they put me to sleep, and I'm talented at falling asleep. So I know that if I'm talking, if I'm walking, if I'm writing, if I'm doing, that I'm less likely to fall asleep and less likely for my mind to totally wander off. Okay, so do this and let me know how I can help. And I'm signing off for now. I will check in with you on Thursday. Bye.